The day my daughter-in-law found out I'd lost my job, she screamed I was a useless financial drain, and kicked me out. She thought she was throwing a poor helpless widow out on the street. She didn't know my layoff came with a secret $2 million settlement, or that my name was on the deed to her house. She thought she was getting rid of a burden, but she was wrong. Before I begin, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. My name is Patricia Mayfield. For the past 2 years, I have been a ghost in a house that was supposed to be my home. I haunt the quiet, sun-drenched hallways of a sprawling mansion in Alpharetta, a silent, peripheral figure in the loud, glittering life of my daughter-in-law, Simone. My presence here is the fulfillment of a promise, the most sacred and heartbreaking promise of my life, made to my son David in the final lucid hours before the cancer took him from me. He was lying in a sterile white hospital bed, his hand once so strong now a fragile bird-like thing in mine. "Mom," he had whispered, his voice a ragged thread. "I don't want you to be alone. And I don't want Zoe to grow up without you." His eyes, full of a desperate, loving urgency, had locked on mine. "Promise me. Promise me you'll sell the house in Grant Park and move in with them. Please. Let the 2 women I love most in the world take care of each other. Let my little girl have her Nana." How could I refuse? I had nodded, the tears I had been holding back for weeks finally breaking free. I had promised. Simone, his wife, had stood on the other side of the bed, her own face a mask of perfect telegenic grief. She had nodded her agreement, her hand resting on David's shoulder. "Of course, baby," she had murmured. "Your mother will always have a home with us." And so I had kept my promise. I sold my beautiful paid-for home in Grant Park, the house where I had raised David, the house filled with 40 years of my own history. And at David's insistence, a detail he had made me promise to uphold, I had taken the entire proceeds from that sale and contributed it to the down payment on the new, much larger house in Alpharetta that Simone had always dreamed of. It was his final gift to her, a way to ensure her comfort, and his final gift to me, a way to ensure my place in their lives. I was not just moving in. I was an investor, a partner in this new family home. I had kept my promise. Simone, I was about to learn, had her fingers crossed behind her back. The first year after David's death was a blur of shared grief. We moved into the new house, and for a while we were a small, broken family bound together by our loss. But as Simone's grief began to recede, it was replaced by something else, something colder, a resentful tolerance of my presence. I was no longer the grieving mother of her late husband. I was a permanent, non-paying boarder in her grand new home. Then, a year ago, my own private world collapsed. For 35 years, I had been a dedicated and highly respected executive assistant at a massive, Atlanta-based corporation. I was the rock, the institutional memory of my department. But a new, younger vice president had taken over. A man with a taste for corporate buzzwords and a deep, unspoken aversion to anyone over the age of 50. My annual review, which for 3 decades had been a litany of praise, was suddenly filled with vague, unsubstantiated criticisms. My skill set was becoming obsolete. I was not adapting to the new, dynamic corporate culture. 2 weeks later, I was called into an HR meeting and was told my position had been eliminated. I was downsized. I was a 63-year-old woman, a lifetime of loyal service erased in a 10-minute meeting. The humiliation was a physical thing, a cold, heavy stone in the pit of my stomach. I did not tell Simone the truth. I couldn't. I knew how she saw me. I was already a burden, a charity case. To admit that I had lost my job, that my modest income was now gone, would be to hand her the very weapon she needed to justify her growing contempt for me. So I told her a partial truth. I told her I had been offered an early retirement package, that I was downsized, and was now living on my pension. I let her believe I was a woman of meager and dwindling means. But I did not accept the injustice. I called Elias Thornton. Elias was a brilliant, semi-retired corporate lawyer who had been my late husband's closest friend. He was a man of deep integrity and a fierce, righteous anger. When I told him what had happened, his reaction was a low, dangerous growl. "That's not a downsizing, Patricia," he'd said. "That's a textbook case of age discrimination. And we are going to make them pay for it." For the past year, I have been fighting a quiet, secret, and brutal war. While I was at home, enduring Simone's passive-aggressive slights and her condescending remarks, I was also spending my days in depositions, in mediation hearings, in the cold, sterile world of corporate litigation. I was fighting for my dignity, for my professional life, for the 35 years they had tried to discard like an old piece of office equipment. It was a lonely, exhausting battle, a secret I carried like a hidden wound. And I had no idea that the victorious end of this secret war would coincide so perfectly with the final ugly declaration of the war my daughter-in-law was about to wage on me. Simone's cruelty was a performance, and her stage was the internet. She was a social media influencer, a woman who had built a brand on a carefully curated fantasy of perfect motherhood, effortless wealth, and magnanimous generosity. Her online persona, Simone in the suburbs, was a daily broadcast of her own fabulousness, and I, her live-in mother-in-law, had become one of her favorite props. The most public and painful example of this occurred on a Tuesday afternoon. Simone was doing a live stream for her thousands of followers. The topic was the joys and challenges of the modern multi-generational home. I was sitting quietly in a corner of the vast white-on-white living room, reading a book, trying to make myself as small and as invisible as possible. Simone, dressed in an expensive-looking athleisure set, sat on her pristine white sofa, her face perfectly made up, a bright artificial smile plastered on her lips. She spoke to the camera with a practiced, intimate sincerity. "So many of you have asked me about our living situation," she began, her voice a smooth, soothing purr. "And I just want to be real with you guys. Having my mother-in-law, Patricia, live with us has been such a blessing." He paused for dramatic effect. "But it's also a challenge." "Of course it is." She then looked over at me, a pitying, condescending smile on her face, and gestured for the camera to pan in my direction. "Say hi to the internet, Patricia," she chirped. I looked up, startled, the camera lens a cold, intrusive eye. I gave a small, awkward wave. "Patricia is my little charity case," Simone continued, winking at the camera as if sharing a cute, private joke. "After my husband, her son, passed, she had nowhere else to go. And of course we took her in. Because that's what family does, right? We carry our burdens with love. My little charity case. Our burden." The words, spoken so sweetly, so performatively, were a public flogging. She was painting herself as a saint, a martyr to family duty, and me as a helpless, dependent freeloader. The comments from her followers began to pour in, a stream of sycophantic praise. "You have such a big heart, Simone. What a wonderful example you are setting for your daughter. My mother-in-law is such a burden too. You are a saint for doing this." Simone basked in the praise, her smile widening. She had successfully used my presence, my grief, my quiet dignity as a backdrop for her own performance of generosity. She had taken my life and turned it into content for her brand. I sat there under the hot, humiliating glare of her phone's camera, and I felt a profound sense of dislocation. The woman on the screen, this benevolent, long-suffering saint, was a complete stranger to me. The real Simone was the woman who would sigh dramatically every time I entered a room, the woman who would complain to her friends on the phone about the lack of privacy in her own home, the woman who had just last week, accidentally, donated my favorite winter coat to Goodwill. I was not a beloved family member. I was a prop, a supporting character in the ongoing drama of her own fabulousness. And the price of my room and board was my daily, public, and very quiet humiliation. The call that changed everything came on a Thursday morning. I was in my bedroom, the one small space in the vast, sterile mansion that felt like mine, folding my laundry. It was the only chore Simone allowed me to do, a small, constant reminder of my domestic non-contributing status. My phone, a simple, older model, buzzed on the nightstand. It was Elias Thornton. My heart gave a nervous leap. We were in the final, tense stages of the lawsuit. The corporation, after a year of legal stonewalling, had finally, faced with the mountain of evidence Elias had compiled, agreed to enter into a final settlement negotiation. This was the call. "Elias," I said, my voice a quiet, anxious thing. "Patricia," he replied, and I could hear a new, unfamiliar note in his voice. It was a note of profound, triumphant satisfaction. "I have some news." "Good or bad?" I asked, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. "That depends," he said, a low chuckle in his voice. "Do you consider $2 million to be good news?" I sank onto the edge of my bed, my legs suddenly weak. $2 million? I whispered, the number sounding unreal, impossible. $2 million, Patricia, he confirmed, his voice ringing with a lawyer's joyous victory. Net. After my fees. They folded. Completely. They were terrified of this going to a jury. The optics of them firing a loyal 35-year employee for turning 63. It was a PR nightmare they were not willing to risk. They tried to lowball us, of course. But I held firm. I told them we would see them in court. They called back an hour ago and accepted our final offer. I was speechless. I just sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, the sounds of my own breathing loud in the quiet room. It was not just the money. It was the vindication. It was the knowledge that my 35 years of service, my professional life, had not been worthless. It had been valued in the cold, hard, and undeniable language of a legal settlement at $2 million. The funds will be wired to your private, individual account within 72 hours, Patricia, Elias continued, his voice now taking on a more serious, strategic tone. And this is the most important part. You are not to say a word. Not to anyone. Especially not to your daughter-in-law. Let her continue to believe you are a penniless retiree. Let her continue to believe she holds all the cards. It is our single greatest advantage. Do you understand? I understand, Elias, I said, my voice a near whisper. Good, he said. You have won, Patricia. You have won a great victory. Now sit back, be quiet, and let's see what the other side does when they think you are at your weakest. I hung up the phone. I looked around my small, borrowed room at my simple, worn belongings. On the outside, nothing had changed. I was still Patricia Mayfield, the quiet, dependent widow. But on the inside, a revolution had occurred. I was no longer a charity case. I was a multimillionaire. And I had a feeling that the quiet, one-sided war of attrition that Simone had been waging against me was about to escalate into a full-blown and very, very costly mistake on her part. The final, ugly confrontation was precipitated, as so many of life's dramas are, by a simple matter of money and status. Simone had her heart set on a new car, a top-of-the-line pearl-white Escalade, a vehicle that was less a mode of transportation and more a rolling declaration of suburban supremacy. It was the same car that the most popular, most successful influencer in her circle had just purchased, and Simone was consumed with a burning, obsessive envy. She had gone to the bank to apply for a loan, her face a mask of confident expectation. She had been denied. The loan officer, a polite but firm woman, had explained that their debt-to-income ratio was simply too high. The massive mortgage on the Alpharetta mansion, combined with their profligate spending habits, meant that, on paper, they were stretched to their absolute limit. Simone had come home from that meeting in a state of pure volcanic rage. She was not angry at the bank. She was not angry at her own financial irresponsibility. She was looking for a scapegoat, a single simple target upon which to unload all of her frustration and humiliation. And her eyes, as sharp and as cold as a hawk's, had landed on me. I was in the kitchen preparing a simple soup for my lunch when she stormed in. She threw her designer handbag onto the marble island with a loud, aggressive thud. "This is your fault," she spat, her voice a low, trembling hiss. I looked up from the carrots I was chopping, my expression one of quiet confusion. "I'm sorry, Simone. What is my fault?" "All of it," she shrieked, her carefully constructed mask of serene online perfection completely gone, replaced by a face of ugly, unrestrained fury. This house. This constant, grinding financial pressure. It's you. You are the reason I can't have nice things." I stared at her, my mind struggling to follow the twisted, narcissistic logic of her accusation. "We have a guest room that is occupied rent-free by a person who does not contribute a single penny to this household," she continued, her voice rising with every word. "Do you have any idea what that costs? The food you eat, the electricity you use, the water for your endless long showers? It all adds up. You are a line item, Patricia. A constant, draining, and completely useless expense." She was a woman possessed, a creature of pure, materialistic rage. The years of her barely concealed resentment, of her forced, resentful tolerance, were now boiling over in a foul, unstoppable torrent. "I have been carrying you for 2 years," she screamed, her voice now a shrill, piercing thing. "Carrying you out of the goodness of my heart, out of respect for my dead husband's foolish, sentimental wishes. And what do I get for it? Nothing. I get a lazy, ungrateful woman who sits around all day reading books and contributing nothing. You are a financial drain. You are dead weight. And I am done. I am done carrying you. The final, ugly, and unforgivable argument had finally arrived. And it was even more brutal than I could have imagined. The argument, if one could call it that, was a monologue. I did not engage. I did not defend myself. I simply stood by the kitchen counter, the knife still in my hand, and I listened as Simone unloaded 2 years of pent-up venomous resentment. I was a quiet, still point in the center of her hurricane of rage. My silence, my refusal to be drawn into her drama, seemed to enrage her even more. She had expected me to cry, to plead, to apologize for the crime of my own existence. My quiet, unshakable composure was a refutation of her power, and she could not bear it. It was at that moment that my granddaughter, 10-year-old Zoe, walked into the kitchen. She had heard the shouting from her playroom upstairs. Her small face was pale, her eyes wide with a fear and a confusion that broke my heart. "Mommy," she said, her voice a small, trembling thing. "Why are you yelling at Nana?" Simone whirled around, her rage now turning on her own child. "You stay out of this, Zoe," she snapped. "This is a grown-up conversation." Zoe, who had her father's kind and gentle heart, did not retreat. She ran to me, her small arms wrapping around my waist, her body a tiny, fierce shield. "Don't you yell at my Nana," she cried, her own voice now rising in a passionate, tearful defense. "She's the best Nana in the whole world." Simone's face in that moment was a mask of pure, ugly jealousy. To be defied by her own daughter, for the sake of the woman she so deeply despised, was the final, unforgivable insult. She strode over and physically pulled Zoe away from me, her fingers digging into her daughter's small arm. "I told you to go to your room," she hissed. "Now." She then turned her furious, tear-streaked face to me. The last vestiges of her control were gone. She was a woman completely consumed by her own petty and deeply selfish rage. "I want you out," she said, her voice a low, final, and utterly chilling command. "I am done. I am done sharing my home with a person who has turned my own child against me. I am done carrying dead weight." She pointed a trembling finger towards the door. "You have 1 week," she said, her voice as cold and as hard as the marble countertops. "1 week to pack your bags and get out of my house. And if you are not gone by then, I will have you physically removed. Do you understand me?" I looked at her, at this woman whose life I had inadvertently subsidized, whose home my own life savings had helped to purchase. I looked at my granddaughter, who was now sobbing openly, her small face a picture of heartbreak and disillusionment. And I did not argue. I did not plead. I simply looked my daughter-in-law in the eye, and I gave her a single, quiet nod. "I understand," I said. The promise I had made to my dying son was now officially broken. Not by me, but by the profound and unforgivable cruelty of the woman he had married. The banishment was complete. The week that followed was a quiet, surreal exercise in emotional detachment. I moved through the grand, silent house like a ghost, packing my life into a single large suitcase. I did not take much. A few changes of clothes. My books. The framed photographs of my husband and my son, David. The small, precious mementos of a life that now felt like it belonged to someone else. Simone and I did not speak. We existed in separate parallel universes, our paths occasionally crossing in the wide, impersonal hallways of the mansion. She would look at me with a cold, triumphant satisfaction. I would look at her with a quiet, unreadable calm. The most painful part was Zoe. She would come into my room in the evenings, her small face etched with a sorrow and a confusion that was far too heavy for a 10-year-old to bear. She would sit on my bed and watch me pack, her eyes full of a silent, pleading question. Why is this happening? I would hold her and I would tell her that I loved her, that I would always love her, and that we would see each other again very, very soon. It was a promise I fully intended to keep. On the final day, a week after the screaming match in the kitchen, I was packed. My single large suitcase stood by the front door. I waited until Simone had left for one of her long self-congratulatory spa days. I then went to Zoe's room. I hugged her, a long, fierce, and desperate embrace. I whispered in her ear, "I love you more than all the stars in the sky, my sweet girl. And I will see you soon. I promise." I then walked out of the house for the last time. I did not look back. I walked down the long, curving driveway of the Alpharetta mansion, my suitcase rolling quietly behind me on the smooth, paved surface. I did not feel like a victim. I did not feel like a refugee. I felt like a soldier making a strategic retreat before the launch of a massive and overwhelming counteroffensive. I sat on the curb at the end of the driveway, my suitcase beside me, and I called a cab. Then I made the second and far more important call. I dialed the number for Elias Thornton. "Elias," I said, my voice as calm and as steady as a surgeon's hand. "It's Patricia." "Patricia," he replied, his voice warm but with an undercurrent of concern. "I was just about to call you. I was hoping to hear how you were." "I am fine, Elias," I said. "In fact, I am better than fine. I am calling to confirm the wire transfer. Has the settlement arrived?" There was a small, pregnant pause on the other end of the line. "Yes, Patricia," he said, his voice now a low, serious thing. "Yes. The full $2 million was deposited into your private account yesterday afternoon. It is secure." "Good," I said. I looked up the long, manicured driveway at the grand, imposing house that was no longer my home. "The contingency has been met," I said, my voice as cold and as clear as the morning air. "Please proceed." "Consider it done, Patricia," he replied, and I could hear the grim, righteous satisfaction in his voice. "Consider it done." The cab pulled up to the curb. The driver, a kind-faced man, got out to help me with my bag. The first quiet and deeply satisfying phase of my revenge was complete. The cab driver loaded my single large suitcase into the trunk of his car. He held the back door open for me, his expression one of polite, professional courtesy. "Where to, ma'am?" he asked as he slid into the driver's seat. I took a deep breath. This was the first tangible act of my new life. The first decision made not as a dependent, not as a burden, but as a free and very wealthy woman. "The Four Seasons Hotel in Midtown, please," I said, my voice calm and clear. The driver's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, a flicker of surprise in them. The woman he had just picked up from the curb of a suburban mansion, with her single, sad-looking suitcase, did not look like the typical guest of the Four Seasons. But he was a professional. He simply nodded. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and pulled away from the curb, leaving the grand, sterile prison of my former life behind me. The drive to Midtown was a journey from one reality to another. We left the sprawling, manicured lawns and the artificial, gated tranquility of Alpharetta and moved towards the vibrant, beating heart of the city. The skyline of Atlanta rose up before me, a collection of glittering glass and steel towers, a testament to ambition and power. It was a world I had once been a part of in my own quiet way, and a world I was now re-entering not as a victim but as a player. When we pulled into the elegant circular driveway of the Four Seasons, a valet in a crisp uniform rushed to open my door. I paid the cab driver, adding a $100 tip, an act of quiet, anonymous generosity that felt deeply, profoundly satisfying. I walked into the lobby of the hotel, a soaring, cathedral-like space of polished marble, modern art, and the quiet, expensive scent of fresh flowers. It was a world away from the silent, judgmental halls of Simone's mansion. It was a world of anonymous, professional service, a world where your worth was measured not by your family connections, but by your ability to pay the bill. And I, for the first time in a very long time, was more than capable of paying the bill. I walked up to the front desk. "I'd like a suite, please," I said to the polite young woman behind the counter. "For a week. With a view of the city." She tapped on her computer, her expression never changing. "Of course, ma'am," she said. "The presidential suite is available." "That will be fine," I said. I pulled out the new platinum debit card that Elias had sent me, a card linked directly to my $2 million settlement account. I slid it across the counter. The young woman swiped it. The transaction was approved in an instant. I spent the rest of that day in a state of quiet, luxurious bliss. I had a long hot bath in the suite's massive marble tub. I ordered an extravagant room service meal, which I ate in a plush terrycloth robe while looking out at the glittering panorama of the city. This was not an act of frivolous, vengeful spending. It was an act of reclamation. It was a strategic move. I was removing myself from the battlefield of my old life and establishing a new, powerful and unassailable position. I was washing away the grime of Simone's contempt, of her charity, of the profound humiliation of the past 2 years. I was not the poor, homeless woman she had kicked out onto the street. I was a wealthy, independent woman, staying at the finest hotel in the city. And from this new luxurious command center, I was about to launch the second and far more devastating phase of my counterattack. The next morning, I sat in a plush armchair in my hotel suite, a cup of excellent coffee on the table beside me, and I began to set the financial dominoes in motion. The first and most important call was to the private wealth division of the bank that held the mortgage on the Alpharetta house. I was, of course, already a valued client, thanks to the new $2 million account Elias had established for me. I was put through immediately to a senior vice president. "Good morning, Ms. Mayfield," he said, his voice the smooth, respectful purr of a man who is speaking to a person of significant means. "How can I be of assistance to you today?" "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," I replied, my own voice calm and professional. "I am calling to discuss the property at 1250 Windsor Park Lane in Alpharetta. I believe your bank holds the mortgage on that residence." "Yes, that is correct," he said. "The mortgage is in the name of Mr. and Mrs. David Mayfield." "That is only partially correct," I said. "My late son's name is on the mortgage, yes. But I believe if you consult the actual property deed, you will find that I, Patricia Mayfield, am also listed as a co-owner, with full rights of survivorship." There was a pause on the other end of the line, the sound of a keyboard clicking rapidly. This was the moment of truth, the activation of the secret my son had put in place to protect me all those years ago. When David and I had sat in the lawyer's office, signing the papers for the down payment on the Alpharetta house, he had been adamant. "I want my mother's name on the deed," he had told the lawyer, over Simone's quiet, simmering objections. "She is not just giving us a gift, she is an investor in this home. This is her house too. I want that to be legally and permanently on the record." Simone, in her arrogance, had dismissed it as a sentimental, meaningless gesture. She had been so focused on the grand new house that she had paid no attention to the fine print. She had, I was sure, forgotten all about it. But the law does not forget. "Ah," Mr. Harrison said, his voice now holding a new note of interest. "Yes, I see it now. You are indeed listed as a co-owner on the title. My apologies, Ms. Mayfield. How can I help you?" The first domino had fallen. My legal standing was confirmed. Now it was time to push the next one. "Mr. Harrison," I said, "I have been, against my will, removed from that residence by the other occupant, Mrs. Simone Mayfield. As we are clearly no longer in agreement about the use of the property, I am exercising my legal right as a co-owner. I am formally requesting that the bank provide my lawyer, Mr. Elias Thornton, with all necessary documentation to initiate a partition action to force the sale of the property." Another longer pause. A partition action. The words were a legal bomb. Mr. Harrison, a man who dealt with the messy financial lives of the wealthy, understood their implications perfectly. "I see," he said, his voice now a low, serious thing. "That is, of course, your legal right, Ms. Mayfield. I will have our legal department gather the necessary documents and forward them to Mr. Thornton's office immediately." "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," I said. "You've been very helpful." I hung up the phone. The second domino was falling. The legal machinery was now in motion. The house, the very symbol of Simone's status, the castle from which she had so cruelly banished me, was no longer her home. It was a contested asset about to be forced into a court-ordered sale. The foundation of her entire beautiful, curated life had just been fractured, and she had no idea the earthquake was coming. With my co-ownership confirmed by the bank, Elias Thornton moved with the swift, merciless precision of a striking cobra. He spent the next 24 hours preparing the legal documents, a task he undertook with a righteous, almost joyful sense of purpose. The partition action was his specialty, a legal instrument he had wielded many times in his long career to resolve disputes between warring business partners. He was, he told me, delighted to be using it to resolve a dispute with a warring daughter-in-law. The legal package he assembled was a masterpiece of quiet, overwhelming force. It was not a letter. It was not a plea. It was a formal, non-negotiable court filing, a declaration of legal war. On Friday morning, exactly 1 week after I had been kicked out of the house, a professional process server, a tall, impassive man with a face like a stone, was dispatched to the Alpharetta mansion. The scene, as Elias later had it described to him, was one of pure, poetic justice. Simone was, at that very moment, in the middle of a live stream for her followers. She was in her gleaming all-white kitchen, demonstrating how to make a simple rustic lemon tart, a performance of domestic goddesshood for her adoring audience. The doorbell rang. Simone, with a small theatrical sigh of annoyance, excused herself from the camera. "Oh dear," she said to her followers. "The perils of living in the real world. Probably just a delivery. I'll be right back." She opened the front door to find the impassive process server standing on her porch. "Mrs. Simone Mayfield?" he asked, his voice a flat, official monotone. "Yes," she replied, her own voice a mixture of impatience and curiosity. "You have been served," he said. He handed her the thick, official-looking legal envelope, turned and walked away, his job complete. Simone, her curiosity now tinged with a flicker of alarm, closed the door and walked back into the kitchen, the envelope in her hand, her live stream still running. "Well, that was dramatic," she said to her audience with a small, nervous laugh. "Let's see what this is all about. Probably just some boring papers for the estate." And then, live in front of her thousands of followers, she opened the envelope. She pulled out the documents. The first thing she saw was the cover sheet with its stark, bold, and deeply intimidating heading, "In the Superior Court of Fulton County, State of Georgia." Her smile faltered. This was not a simple estate matter. She began to read. She read the first line of the legal filing. "Petition for the partition and sale of real property at 1250 Windsor Park Lane, Alpharetta, Georgia." She read the name of the petitioner, the person who was suing to force the sale of her home, Patricia Mayfield. Her face, which had been a mask of bright, performative cheer, went completely, utterly, and beautifully blank. She just stared at the paper, her mind refusing to process the words. Patricia? Forcing the sale? It was impossible. It was insane. And then her eyes fell to the second document in the package. The certified copy of the property deed. He saw it. The name she had either forgotten or had never bothered to notice. Her own name, and beside it, the name of the woman she had just kicked out onto the street, Patricia Mayfield. The third domino had not just fallen. It had crashed through the floor of her entire carefully constructed world. The live stream captured the entire silent and deeply satisfying implosion. Simone's followers were treated to the bizarre, compelling spectacle of their favorite influencer staring at a piece of paper as the color drained from her face, her mouth opening and closing silently like a fish. After a full, excruciating minute of dead air, she seemed to remember where she was. She fumbled for her phone and, with a trembling hand, ended the broadcast, leaving her audience in a state of wild, gossipy speculation. The legal notice was a multi-pronged assault, each document a separate, devastating blow. The first was the partition action itself, the declaration that her home was no longer a sanctuary, but a contested asset about to be liquidated by the courts. The second was the deed, the irrefutable public record proof of my co-ownership. It was the document that stripped her of her primary source of power. She was not the queen of the castle. She was merely a resident, and a resident who had just made the fatal mistake of evicting the co-owner. But it was the third document in the package that was the true kill shot. It was the one designed not just to inform her of her legal predicament, but to utterly and completely annihilate her entire condescending worldview. It was a simple one-page cover letter from Elias Thornton's law firm. It was a simple one-page cover letter from Elias Thornton's law firm. It was addressed to her. Read, "Dear Mrs. Mayfield, please find enclosed a legal petition for the partition and sale of the property you currently occupy. As you will see from the enclosed deed, my client, Mrs. Patricia Mayfield, is a legal co-owner of the property, and she is now exercising her right to force its sale. My client is, of course, aware that a legal battle of this nature can be costly and protracted. She wished for me to inform you that she is fully prepared to litigate this matter to its conclusion, using her own not inconsiderable personal resources." And attached to that letter, the final, beautiful, and utterly devastating exhibit, was a certified, notarized copy of my new private bank statement. The statement was simple. It showed my name, Patricia Mayfield. It showed the name of the bank. And it showed my current available balance. $2,014,321.58. The number would have been an atomic bomb in the center of her reality. The woman she had kicked out of her house for being a useless financial drain. The woman she had condescendingly referred to as her charity case. The woman she believed was living on a meager pension, a poor, helpless widow with nowhere else to go. That woman was a multimillionaire. Every single one of her assumptions, the entire foundation of her cruel transactional worldview, was a lie. I was not weak, I was powerful. I was not dependent, I was independently, staggeringly wealthy. The revelation was not just about the money. It was about the power dynamic. She had believed she was the one in control, the one with the big house, the successful brand, the perfect life. And in the space of a single legal document she had been revealed as a fool. A small, petty, and profoundly ignorant woman who had been living on the subsidized generosity of a person whose financial reality she could not even begin to comprehend. The final domino had fallen, and it had brought the entire hollow structure of her life crashing down with it. The week that followed the service of the legal papers was, as Elias later described it, a symphony of panicked, desperate backpedaling. Simone's lawyer, a man who was clearly out of his depth, called Elias's office a dozen times. The calls, which began with blustering threats, quickly devolved into desperate, pleading attempts at negotiation. Simone, the proud, untouchable queen of Alpharetta, was terrified. The partition action was a legal certainty. The court would, without question, order the sale of the house. She was facing the very real, very public, and very humiliating prospect of being forced out of her own home. And she was facing it with the knowledge that her adversary was not a poor, helpless old woman, but a multimillionaire with the resources and the will to see the fight through to its bitter end. She had no choice but to surrender. A meeting was arranged. It was not a negotiation. It was a formal and final dictation of terms. The meeting took place in Elias's grand, intimidating boardroom. Simone arrived with her lawyer. The arrogant, condescending woman I had known was gone, replaced by a pale, trembling creature with dark circles under her eyes. She looked small and defeated, and for the first time I felt a flicker of something that resembled pity. It passed quickly. I did not speak during the meeting. I sat at the head of the table, a quiet, observant matriarch, and I let Elias, my lawyer, my friend, my avenging angel, do the talking. He laid out my offer. It was, on its surface, a generous one. "My client, Mrs. Mayfield," he began, his voice a low, calm, and utterly implacable thing, "is prepared to buy out your 50% equity share in the Kenwood property. We have had the house professionally appraised. Its current market value is $1.5 million. Your half of the equity, therefore, is $750,000. My client is prepared to write you a check for that amount, in exchange for you signing over your portion of the deed and vacating the premises within 30 days. I saw a flicker of hope, of greedy relief in Simone's eyes. $750,000. It was a fortune. It was a lifeline. She was about to walk away from this disaster, a very wealthy woman. However, Elias continued, and the single word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. He slid a second document across the polished table. It was not a legal filing. It was an invoice. However, he repeated, my client has also prepared a final accounting of certain debits that must be settled before the final payout can be calculated. He explained the invoice. It was a meticulously calculated bill for my room and board for the 2 years I had lived in the house. It was based on the fair market rental value of a private suite in the Alpharetta area. It was a substantial 5-figure sum. And, Elias continued, his voice as cold as a tomb, there is a second line item. A fee for infliction of emotional distress, public humiliation and wrongful eviction, stemming from the events of 2 weeks ago. My client has assessed this fee at a very reasonable $100,000. He then did the final brutal math. He took the $750,000 of her equity, and he subtracted the cost of my room and board, and he subtracted the $100,000 fee for her cruelty. The final number, the actual amount she would be walking away with, was still a substantial sum. But it was a fraction of what she had believed she was getting. It was a quiet, elegant, and deeply just financial punishment for her sins. Simone stared at the final number, her face a mask of disbelief and a dawning, impotent rage. She looked at me, her eyes pleading, searching for a sign of weakness, of sentimentality. She found none. This is my final offer, Simone, I said, speaking for the first time, my voice quiet, but as hard and as unyielding as granite. You can take it, or we can see you in court. The choice is yours. She knew she had no choice. The reckoning was complete. The closing took place 2 weeks later. It was a quiet, somber affair in Elias's office. Simone signed the papers, her hand trembling slightly, her face a mask of sullen, resentful defeat. A check for the reduced but still significant buyout amount was handed to her. And the deed to the Alpharetta mansion, the grand symbol of her ambition, was signed over to me, its new and sole owner. The weeks that followed were a period of quiet transition. Simone, with her cash infusion, did not, as I had expected, immediately buy a new, smaller palace. She was, I learned through the quiet family grapevine, being sued by the bank for the loan on the luxury car she had been so desperate to buy. Her life of effortless credit was over. She and Zoe moved into a modest, rented townhouse, a world away from the gated communities and the country club set she had so desperately courted. Her online brand, Simone in the Suburbs, with its daily broadcasts of a life she no longer lived, went silent. And I, after a month of quiet reflection in my suite at the Four Seasons, went home. The day I moved back into the Alpharetta house was a cool, clear autumn afternoon. The house was empty, silent, scrubbed clean of the last vestiges of Simone's presence. It felt different. It felt peaceful. I was not alone. Zoe was with me. Part of my agreement with Simone, a non-negotiable clause that Elias had insisted upon, was a formal court-ordered joint custody agreement. I was now Zoe's legal, part-time guardian. She would spend weekends and holidays with me in the house where she had grown up, the house that was now unequivocally her grandmother's. She ran into the house ahead of me, her laughter echoing in the vast, empty foyer. "We're home, Nana," she shouted. "Yes, baby," I said, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. "We're home." I had not just reclaimed a piece of property. I had reclaimed my family. I had fulfilled the promise I had made to my dying son on my own terms. I had secured a safe, stable, and loving home for his daughter, free from the toxic, materialistic ambition of her mother. I stood in the center of the grand living room, the afternoon sun streaming through the large, unadorned windows, and I felt a profound sense of peace. I had been a ghost in this house, a burden, a charity case. Now I was its matriarch, its protector, its queen. I had been kicked out, but I had returned not as a victim but as the owner. And my new deed was not just a legal document. It was a testament to a quiet, underestimated woman who had, in the end, proven that the surest foundation of all is not wealth, not status, but a mother's fierce and very, very patient love.